So what we're going to talk about today is the limited prep events. And with the limited prep events, you don't have a whole lot of time. The students are a little bit stressed with how all this goes together. And so keep in mind, one, have a little bit of patience with them. And to help them out along the way, this is an event that you need to practice judging. Just like we encourage our students that they need to practice, you need to make sure that you practice judging limited prep events. This is one of those where you, just like Fozzie Bear, you have to pat your head and rub your stomach at the same time. With limited prep events, you have to keep time and give time signals. But don't fret, these are fantastic. And once you get the hang of it, you will absolutely love it. So the events I'm covering today specifically are impromptu speaking, extemporaneous, and broadcasting. And like sands through the hourglass, let's go into impromptu speaking. And impromptu speaking, they said do it. They said it would be fun. And sometimes kids can be a little bit nervous and apprehensive with impromptu speaking. It is fantastic. A middle school coach in our district uses this in class, and they refer to it as the fortune cookie speech. And they will actually open up a fortune cookie, have the student read the fortune, and begin talking for a couple of minutes. We don't have enough fortune cookies to share, and they won't go through the screen. So we do things a little bit differently when it comes to Kissel competition. And for the senior high events with impromptu speaking, you have 7 minutes total to work with, 3 prep max for speaking, for prep, I should say. And then for speaking, you've got 4 minutes minimum that you need to use. You can divvy that time up how you'd like to. If a student wants to prep for 1 minute, speak for 6, they absolutely can. At the junior high level, they've got 10 minutes to work with. They can prep for 7 minutes max, and they can speak for 3 minutes minimum. You probably will not see a student prep for 1 minute and then speak for 9. But I guess if they wanted to, they could. There is a 15-second grace period for going over if that happens in impromptu speaking. And if it does, you just drop that student 1 rank. The judge, again, manages that prep time, and they give time signals, and we count down for those students. Make sure that you allow them time to receive their prompt and get to their seat before you begin timing them. Don't stress them out. Don't start that timer immediately and make it into a race. Give them a moment to breathe and move through the process. For this event, students will not use an electronic device, so they won't use their phones. They will not look up anything on their laptops. They can use a 3x5 note card if they wish. It's optional. They don't have to, but they can. And students that use anything more than a 3x5 note card should be ranked last in the round because that's against the rules. Students will choose between 2 prompts in prelims, and they'll have only 1 in finals. And usually in finals, it's an object of some kind. Students will need to wait outside the room until it is their time to speak. And that will go the same for virtual competition if you are competing live. 1 student enters the room, receives the prompt, they prep, and then they speak until they've finished, and then they can be on their way. Again, the integrity of the prompt is so very important. So make sure that only that student who's competing is in the room, and that they don't share that prompt with others. We want to make sure that it's brand new to them when they walk in. Some hints for judges. Don't allow other students to listen before they have spoken. Make sure to clarify with your students that you are giving time signals and that you'll be counting down for those. Use hand signals. And also you should be calling out the time remaining aloud when the student is speaking. Make sure that the student returns the prompt when they are finished. It would be quite sad if the student left the room and took the quotation with them. So make sure that you ask for that back. And remember to grade students both on content and delivery. The two should go hand in hand when it comes to impromptu speaking. Now for Robinson's recommendations. With this, it's important that you time students. And if you use your cell phone, which is perfectly a fine thing to do, put it on airplane mode. Do not allow the student to be disrupted with a text message or for you to receive a notification that it's time to play someone in Words with Friends. Don't be rude, be kind, and be courteous, and put that phone in airplane mode. And that goes not just for this event, but for any other. Observe how the student decides to make good use of their prep and their speaking time. Listen for a thoughtful and organized discussion, and watch for a conversational tone and smooth delivery. And make sure that you cheer these students along every step of the way. This stuff is not easy. It's stressful, and you have to learn how to manage your resources and your time well. So make sure that you are appreciative in how you listen to and give them feedback when judging in impromptu speaking. Now let's shift gears and move on to extemporaneous speaking.
Mr.
Yes, sir.
Robinson, can I ask a question here?
Absolutely.
One thing I noticed students doing last year, especially in the virtual world, is they were using their cell phones as timers. Since they don't have the judge there with them very often in a recording, they're using their cell phone to time their speaking. Does that count as an electronic device they can't use, or is that okay?
Well, I would think in the virtual world that would be okay, just because the circumstances may present themselves so that the student is doing all the recording themselves. And so be kind and be lenient when it comes to this online world that we're in. Bill, do you have a question as well?
I do. One of the norms in California was that students were writing the word intro, body 1, body 2, body 3 on their note card. And so it was not a blank note card, but it didn't have specific content, but it did have the outline. Would that be frowned upon here, or would that be acceptable?
Well, I think that should probably be acceptable. If they go into that round and they have, well, if they have other information on it, that's a little dicey. Mr. Meadows, do you feel the same way?
Yeah, I don't think anybody's going to care about that. Yeah, it's not against the rule.
Yeah. Sounds good. Okay, and so now shifting gears, moving from impromptu to extemporaneous. Extemporaneous is current events, and it's what's happening in our world today. And this is great stuff. These are the discussions that we want our students to be having. So when it comes to extemp, know that for senior high, they have 30 minutes to prep and then 7 minutes with which to speak. In junior high, again, 30 minutes to prep, but they only have to speak for 5 minutes. And then with both junior and senior high, those students do get a 30-second grace period. But if they go over that 30-second grace period, then they should be dropped in rank. You are not responsible for managing prep time for students in extemp. There is a separate area where that takes place, and they will be sent to you, these students, one by one. In the real world, and then if we are competing synchronously, it would happen that same way. The judge will give the time signals, and again, use the countdown method. Just like with impromptu, you can use that note card if you wish, but you don't have to. And again, that prep room is going to be a wonderful place where they will keep track of those students and manage the times with which they are sent to you. So whether you are in person or you are online and competing live, those students will be sent normally every 7 to 10 minutes, depending upon how that prep room is run, so that you should not have students outside your room waiting to speak. Some hints for judges with extemporaneous. Take the student's topic before they speak. Maybe ask them what their question is, so that way you can jot it down and you are prepared. Make sure that you clarify time signals before they begin. Don't catch them off guard. Make an outline as they speak. Stay organized and keep up with where they're going with their discussion and how they're answering that question. Keep track of the sources that they use in their presentation. They will have several. In fact, with extemp speeches, you may see 2 sources per point or maybe even more. So keep track of the sources and the variety that they will be using, and maybe how recent or relevant those sources are. And overall, focus on how well that student answers the question. Now, Robinson's recommendations for extemporaneous. The thing about your cell phone, once again, airplane mode is your friend. Observe how the student uses their speaking time. If you have a student that is speaking for 7 minutes, that's fantastic. If you have a student that's speaking for 4 minutes, which again would be the minimum time here that they would speak, that's great. But if they do a really good job of answering that questions in 4 minutes time, they could score well. But just observe how they use the time that they are given. Listen for a thoughtful, organized discussion. Watch for a conversational tone and smooth delivery. And something that I think is very important, especially nowadays when it comes to current events, keep your personal opinions to yourself. Separate yourself from what our students are talking about. Do not penalize a student because your view does not match with how they are answering the question. Look at how well those students are using logic and reasoning and evidence to further the discussion, and grade them accordingly. And once again, cheer these students on every step of the way. This stuff is really tough. Now, moving to broadcasting. Broadcasting is where students sound like a radio announcer. You are focusing on their voice. You are not focusing on their appearance, their facial expressions, or gestures. Competitors for broadcasting, just like the other events, they need to stay outside of the room until it's their turn to perform. The judge collects the script, and then they take that whenever the student is finished speaking. And a student may leave when they have finished their performance. And with this one, it's different from the others because they can time themselves in this event if they wish. And that is especially going to be important for them in rounds 2 and in out rounds such as semis and finals, where they are graded on how close to that time they reach. And in the real world in broadcasting, you've got that clock to work with. So students are allowed to use a timer and let that guide them as they are performing. Broadcasting, round 1 is a commercial that students are given, and they have to read with the appropriate energy and emotion. Round 2 is a prepared news script that student puts together themselves. Round 3 is a tournament prepared news script that those students go to prep and they receive, and they have so long to work on and then bring to you and read aloud. The only thing that they've added to it have been a beginning and ending and any transitions in between. And then the out rounds and finals, there is a news program where they're given a stack of news stories and a prompt for a broadcasting commercial, and they have to come up with a presentation that is no more than 5 minutes in length. So some hints for judges when it comes to broadcasting. Students aren't allowed to listen to each other perform, as we talked about before. Focus on their voice, not their appearance. Round 2 script should be recent. It should have relevant news stories. In other words, they shouldn't be talking about something that happened 5 years ago. They should be reading something that has been published within the last week, let's say. If you get something, yes, Mr. Meadows, go right on ahead.
There's not actually anything in the rule that says it has to be recent. They could do a historical broadcast, for example, like they could pretend they're in the 1940s and do a whole program based on that.
Mm-hmm. It very well could. In the hints for judges in the handbook, it does say something about recent, I do believe, in terms of how that's put together. Now, like Mr. Meadows, personally, I think that students can be creative, and I love to encourage creativity. How you want to rank that is totally up to you, but according to what I see in the handbook, the news story should be recent and relevant. And then transitions should be appropriate. They should make sense. So listen for as they're transitioning from one set of news, from international to national, and then from national to local. We should hear transitions that help you follow along, that don't make you spill your coffee as you're trying to keep up with what's happening next. And then Robinson's recommendations. Again, be careful with airplane mode on your phone. Make sure that you don't disrupt students, and watch how well they use their time in rounds 2 and the out rounds. That's something that is very, very important. And then listen for a thoughtful, organized broadcast with a conversational tone and smooth delivery. And like I said before, cheer the students on every step of the way. This stuff isn't easy. And like Sam's through the hourglass, my time is running out, but we talked about impromptu, extemporaneous, and broadcasting. And let me tell you that as a student, for me, these were not the events that I was thoroughly excited to participate in. But as a coach, I think that these are so very important. And I love working with students and getting them ready to compete in all 3 of these. So practice, not only in guiding your students, but also as a judge, practice timing and cheering those kids on.
All right, great job, Sarah.
Yay! Did I go 15 minutes?
I don't know. I didn't time it.
Yes, Bill.
My question is, if I were tapped to be the monitor for the extemp prep or maybe broadcasting prep, I've never been in a room where someone was prepping their broadcast, but do the students have to keep their camera on and kind of stay in that area to make sure, or is it more of an honor system that we just trust our students are going to be prepping by themselves and not do a collaboration?
I feel as if it should be on. I think that it would be up to the tournament director technically, but I think it's best practice to have that camera on just to keep folks honest.
Right, and definitely for extemp, if it's a synchronous event that's going to happen. So many of the tournaments go for all async in these virtual events, so that's just not possible for that. We're not going to ask kids to turn in a 37-minute recording. That would never upload.
But in impromptu,
and
we do
impromptu,
record their prep
we
time.
ask them to turn it on once they get the prompt and leave it running.
And same thing for improv.
Yeah. With broadcasting for the rooms where they have the prep, it's not really an issue because there's not really anything anybody can do to help you with that.
I have a follow-up. My question is, because I haven't seen broadcasting in maybe 20, 30 years. So I just have a question. Are these kids pretty good in this region? Like, do they get that voice, that kind of excites you a little bit? And do they kind of know to tap into it? Or is it for a lot of them a reading exercise until they kind of get good?
I think they're very competitive, and you will be amazed by what you see. There are students, one of my very first students that I ever coached in broadcasting now is the voice of the Murray State Racers for
neat.
basketball and football. And his career is to work at a radio station.
Is this chicken or egg, Mr. Robinson? Is this chicken or egg? Is it the person did radio and they pursued it, or do they kind of know that they internally that there was an announcer inside them and that radio was just a good fit?
He loves radio, and it was something even as a child that he knew that he wanted to do. And he wanted to not only work and introduce music and be a DJ, but also to do live sports. So it's pretty cool. And don't be surprised if you see some really unusual and wonderfully creative things. To give you an example, there was a student a few years ago who every time he would compete in broadcasting, he did it with a British accent. And you would swear up and down that he was from Britain. And it was great. It was wonderful. But that was his shtick. That was his thing.
Yeah, and they'll come up with themes for their radio stations. I used to have a kid who was obsessed with World War II in the 40s. And so she had a 40s radio station, and she would like preview a song by Frank Sinatra, but now the news, that kind of stuff.
And for their commercials, they'll do the same thing.
Yeah.
And it's great.
So All right. Well, solid job today, fellers.